Вітаємо вас у першій студії. Сьогодні є нагода дізнатися більше про Раду Європи. Ви давно хотіли, очевидно, поставити якісь запитання, подивитися на неї ближче. І що може бути ближче, ніж зараз? Тому що я покликала сьогодні в студію людину, яка щиро вірить у європейське майбутнє України і дуже багато працює для її правового реформування. Welcome studio, Miss Verena Taylor.
Hello.
It's a great chance to talk to Council of Europe directly. I mean, to you.
In my person.
Yes. And for example, if the ordinary people, I mean, ordinary person in the street, just but a pedestrian, ask you what Council of Europe means, how do you manage to explain it? Briefly or popularly or...
Okay. I think there is a very short answer to that and a slightly more interesting and more complicated answer. The short answer is that the Council of Europe is the guardian of human rights, the rule of law and democracy in Europe. We ensure that 800 million Europeans can enjoy those values. The more complicated and longer answer is that we work with our member states, our 47 member states. 47 member states. Ukraine is a member state of the Council of Europe since 1995 already, a long time.
I remember this.
A long time already. And we work together with our member states in order to ensure that, for example, citizens can rely on a functioning judiciary, that citizens can rely on the police acting fairly, that investors can rely on a reliable rule of law, that as much as possible we eradicate corruption and economic crime. But we also work in areas like democracy, with parliaments, we work on constitutions. It's very important also for citizens to have a reliable constitution, to know in which country they live. We also work on education issues, helping teachers to introduce already in the classroom the values of Europe and the values of democracy and of human rights, for example.
Mm-hmm. And in general, it's about the human rights.
I think the glue that holds everything together is human rights, absolutely. The European Convention of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms is our most important European standard for the protection of human rights. And this convention allows citizens to make their governments protect their rights.
Make governments protect.
So the governments agree to certain standards in human rights with regard, for example, to private life, to the judiciary again, to freedom of expression, just a couple, protection from torture, so just to name a few. And the laws in a country must be conceived in a way that allows the government to actually really protect the citizens. If this is not the case, the citizens can take the government to court, to the European Court of Human Rights, which is based in Strasbourg, and which will then look into the case and say either the government is right or the citizen is right.
Yeah, and we have to promote these tools for citizens to use it.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. This is one of our interests. In fact, but the idea is not to have as many cases as possible. Yes, the idea is to have good laws which make it not necessary to go to the European Court, but to already solve issues here, inside the country. And this is also what we are working on together.
Yes, and Ms. Verena, and how many times have you been to Ukraine?
Me, myself?
Yes, yourself.
I don't know how many, but many. The first time I came was in 1992.
1992.
So it was a very long time ago, and at that time I was working on youth leader exchanges, and then later already for the Council of Europe. We were also working with youth organizations. Later on, I came also for the Council of Europe to work on teacher training.
Okay, teacher training.
Teacher training. We have a big program to help teachers to learn from each other in different parts of Europe, and it's to work on different themes from a European perspective, to overcome perhaps just the national view on certain things, and to work together and to have a broader European view, and also to ensure a human rights dimension in teaching in school. This is very exciting, actually.
Yes, so
it's really, really interesting.
Have you been traveling around the Ukraine or visited just Kyiv?
Yeah, so this is the weak point. So in the last 4 years, I've come very many times, sort of, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a year to Kyiv.
To Kyiv.
I have never been anywhere else in Ukraine. It's very sad, actually.
You have to.
I'd really like to see other parts, but I've seen things in Kyiv, and I'm particularly enamored with Besarabsky Chinok. I think this is an absolutely wonderful place.
Yes,
but
very tasty.
Kyiv is actually a really great town. So I like coming, but I come for work usually.
I think it's high price or not.
Well, I think that depends on your income. It's difficult to judge for me.
Yeah.
No, it's not cheap. Yeah.
Yes. And maybe you remember some meetings with some memorable people or some, I don't know, some special person in Ukraine during this time. I just wonder if you're impressed by Ukrainians.
I am impressed with a lot of Ukrainians. We are working together with Ukraine on a cooperation program. And in this context, we, at the beginning of June, had a meeting with representatives of many ministries and other agencies and also civil society in order to discuss our cooperation. And this was a truly impressive meeting because the participants of this meeting were incredibly committed, very knowledgeable. They spoke very good English. I mean, as we have noticed, I do not speak Ukrainian, and many of my colleagues neither, so we had to speak in English. And there was really a feeling of enthusiasm and of the wish to move the country forward, to actually move the reform agenda of the country forward. That was probably the most impressive moment I've had so far. These were deputy ministers, but really interesting, committed people. Young, dynamic.
Motivated, I
Absolutely.
think. Yeah.
That was a very, very good experience.
So you have, you're familiar with our country for a long time, from 1991?
1992.
Great. And you have to notice the changes, I think. And what is your main impression, maybe good or on where we are now?
First of all, I would like to say that I think already in 1992 and before, Ukraine was and is, of course, a European country. Yes. A country which is historically and in its traditions deeply rooted in the European tradition and in European values. I think that is very important, and that is something that one notices everywhere.
And historical,
yeah, this is clear. Yes. And it's very noticeable, it's very touchable. It's, for example, very much expressed in the lively civil society that you have in this country. This is very much a European tradition, that people do not only engage themselves through agencies and parties, but also in non-governmental organizations or in interest groups and so on. In the last couple of years, certainly we feel that Ukraine has made a lot of progress in a number of areas. I think there is now a true interest to reform, for example, the judiciary, to also reform the media sector. You have Rada has recently adopted the law on public broadcasting. Yes. Even if the public broadcaster is not yet active, everything is in place. So these are important steps, I think, in order to ensure a transparent and reliable governance framework, also on which, for example, the media can report in an open and in a manner that is in the interest of the public, let's put it that way, not just guided by commercial interests. We see at the moment a very important reform of the judiciary, which was certainly one of the weaker parts. Reform for we believe that at the moment there is a real desire to reform the judiciary. There is, as you know, a process of vetting, of looking at the qualifications of judges going on, which is a huge undertaking with its own risks, but we are confident that the commission that is looking after this is doing a good job. We have ourselves been involved also in the reform, for example, of the criminal law and the training of the public prosecutors, which comes with that, because changing a law is one thing. That's actually perhaps not even that difficult.
Yes.
The really difficult thing is then to implement the law
and
to gain support by all those who are involved in implementing. They really have to buy in. You can only reform the judiciary if the judges and the prosecutors and everybody believes that this is the new judiciary is better and that it is theirs to a certain extent. And the same is, of course, true of all other areas of life. So yes, I think there is at the moment serious desire for progress. I can only talk about the areas that we are involved with, of course, which are, if you so want, the soft areas, the legal, the human rights, and the rule of law areas, and democracy.
I'm interested according to your experience, how long usually does it take to make reforms? Or I don't know if our country can be compared with any other country, but maybe you can say it or define it or.
That's a tricky question.
Yeah, I know. Everybody on the street asks.
This is a huge country. This is a really big country.
Yes, and very different.
And also a country in a currently very difficult situation. And nevertheless, there is real interest in pushing reforms forward. Yes. So I really can't say how many years. I can tell you about another country where I have recently visited and worked. Much smaller country. I came across a government policy which we tried to introduce 19 years ago, and the government has now actually adopted this policy.
Oh, really?
So sometimes it takes a while, but you have a very sound basis because, as I said earlier, this is a European country, so we do not import something here which is not already in the minds of the people. People here want to be European. They are European. So I think they embrace also the idea of European values being implemented in this country. This is optimistic.
Me too. But it's interesting. We need a model, of course. And it's interesting for me, for example, 47 members in Council of Europe, yeah? And it's very different countries with different culture, history, attitudes, and even very different definition what human rights is. And how Council of Europe managed to adopt the common values in so different countries and make them to be together in understanding the core position on human rights and everything Council of Europe is responsible for.
Well, the Council of Europe is not a new organization. The Council of Europe has been working since 1949. And so since 1949, we are actually building this Europe together, I think, and since 1989 with more countries, with countries which earlier did not have access to the organization. And
the goals change with the times.
I think they become perhaps more ambitious with times. We are now working on issues which in 1949 nobody would have thought about. For example, violence against women.
Oh no.
Nobody would in 1949 have had European standards on violence against women, whereas now we have those. And the interesting thing is that those 47 countries, they develop values together.
Yeah.
It's not something which comes from the moon or from outside or from somebody's clever head. It's really those 47 countries now who together move forward. Every single country has to agree that a new standard is added to what we already have. They then do not have to immediately implement them totally. Yeah. You know, there's always a time where countries have to adapt the legislation. They also have to raise awareness. They have to train their civil servants. They have to do a lot of things in order to make it possible for standards to really be then fully implemented. But the important thing is that when we work with Ukraine, we do not just come here and indeed assist the country in certain reforms. No, at the same time, Ukrainians come to Strasbourg, and together with experts from France, from Sweden, from Hungary, from wherever, develop the values further. So you are part and parcel of the development of the decision-making in Strasbourg.
So what are the main goals for Council of Europe on Ukraine? How define it?
Well,
and objectives.
Yeah, we have an action plan together. We have a cooperation document.
2015, 2017 years. And what
That's
does
right.
it mean?
2015, 2017.
Yes.
It's a programming document on which we agreed together with the Ukrainian authorities in order to support the country in a number of reform projects, including, for example, constitutional reform through the Venice Commission. Many people have heard about the Venice Commission. This is one of the Council of Europe tools. But also judicial reform, decentralization, in the sense of local democracy, making local democracy more effective for citizens to actually experience democracy at first hand. We also work together in the area of penitentiary and anti-torture, effective investigation, police and human rights, this kind of area. And we work together, of course, in the area of elections, and we support also the Ukrainian efforts to combat corruption and economic crime. We have one other and one very important aspect, which I haven't mentioned, is the National Human Rights Action Plan, where we've also worked together with the government and continue to do so.
And how does it look? How do you practically contribute to Ukrainians' reform agenda? Practically, how to touch it?
Basically in two main ways. One is legislative expertise. So if the government wants to change a law, we can come and help and say, well, you could, for example, do it like this. Positive experience in this exists. And also there are European standards, and as a member state of the Council of Europe, you have to respect them, and therefore certain things you cannot do. Certain things are excluded. So this is one thing, the legislative expertise, or in the case of the Venice Commission, the constitutional expertise. Secondly, and I think also very importantly, we support the government, or not just the government actually, but various agencies, very effectively through capacity building, by training, offering to convey new working methods, efficiency, invite your experts and
best practices,
to study best practice elsewhere. A very good example for this is the European Commission for Efficiency of Justice. It's a body that evaluates the effectiveness and impartiality of courts, of the judiciary. And they say, this works, this doesn't work, this could be better. And then they come with solutions and say, if you do this, you will get that result. Of course, in the end, the implementation is yours, Ukrainian. We can only advise and offer support. The end result very much depends on the commitment, of course, of the Ukrainian partners.
Yes. And speaking about the, for example, for implementation of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, could you tell me briefly what is the added value of Council of Europe activities in Ukraine in this respect?
They fit like a glove. They absolutely go together. The European Union is our most important partner politically in Europe. It's also our most important donor, financing cooperation activities. And they support this work because what we do together, Ukraine and the Council of Europe, also strengthens the work for the association agreement and for any European integration ambitions that exist. So quite a few of the objectives of the association agreement are directly mirrored in our cooperation. So directly contribute to Ukraine's ability to respect those additional commitments. But on top of that, the European Union has a dimension which we don't have, which is economic, commercial prosperity. For this, you need a functioning economic life. You need to attract foreign investment and issues like that. And in order to do that, you need a functioning rule of law. You need a functioning, reliable judiciary. And because otherwise foreign investors will not put money here because they can't be sure that in case of a conflict, they actually have fair treatment. Yes. And you also, of course, need to combat corruption. So these things are really directly linked also to your association agreement and cooperation with the European Union.
Thank you. I mentioned in the beginning the so-called ordinary pedestrian who's wonder if Council of Europe is helpful for him in his daily life, and can you respond to him? What is the role of Council of Europe in this aspect of his life?
For the daily life of
yes,
Ukrainian
of course.
people?
Medicine, maybe, I don't know,
well,
impunity,
yes.
ill treatment or something.
I think it matters to the daily lives of people, whether, for example, if they have to take somebody to court, they can expect a fair trial, whether they can expect for the court to function in a correct manner like in other countries. I think it matters to people whether they are expected to pay a bribe to corrupt somebody in order to get good medical treatment in a hospital,
or everyday practice.
Or to obtain a university diploma or whatever, or whether this can be obtained without corruption. So there is a direct link. I think it matters to people whether police is trained about torture and correct investigations and human rights, or whether they are not. So this is why we work on such issues precisely in order to have an effect on the daily lives of people. But again, it also has a lot to do with the will of the relevant agencies to actually change and to apply what they are offered. I think this will is at the moment there. And this is why I think that life of the people will actually change, will be affected positively by the reform process which is currently going on.
Yeah, because corruption starts from the ordinary people, not just in high-level power spheres.
Although it's also important to combat the high-level corruption.
Yes, of course.
We have some experience where low-level corruption can be eradicated, but the high-level corruption continues. So I think both are necessary.
Important, yes, of course, in parallel.
In order for people to actually trust their country.
Yes, and may I ask you, what does it mean, your personal position in Council of Europe? You are director of very complicated, complicated position. What does it mean? What's your responsibility there?
I'm the director of something with a complicated name, this is true. So I won't say the name because it's not really very important. But my directorate is responsible for the coordination of all cooperation activities that the Council of Europe has with member states and even beyond. Because our cooperation with Ukraine is very important. But we have cooperation with another 29 member states, at least, around 30. I don't know exactly because it changes also. So my directorate programs this, plans this cooperation. We implement through offices, which we have in the ground, like we have an office in Kiev with a head of office, Morten Enberg, and some 45 people who work there, who concretely every day work together with the Ukrainian agencies on the reform, and similar offices we have in other countries, 17 such offices. And my directorate is also responsible for finding the resources.
Oh, it's interesting because I just started to ask who are the investors or who funded this project of Council? Who gave the money to this project, and how do you monitor and how we use it here?
Well, I think actually we should use the word investor much more. Usually we say donor, but investor is very good because it means that we invest into reform, and that's an important thing to do. So thank you for this. I'll take this home with me. Sorry, the finances are mixed. A part of it comes from the ordinary budget, from the budget of the Council of Europe, that all countries pay into.
All countries.
All 47 countries pay into our budget, and a part of our money comes from this budget. But the bigger part comes through cooperation with the European Union. The European Union is funding about half of our cooperation activities Europe-wide. We have a portfolio of over 100 million euros with them. And the rest of the money comes from member states. So for example, in the case of Ukraine, which is the biggest action plan, the biggest cooperation project we have, we have at the moment raised some 25 million euros.
Well, that's huge.
A good part from the European Union, and 26 member states of the Council of Europe also give money for this. They pay over 20 million euros, around 20 million euros, because they want to help Ukraine, because they think that what we do together with you is efficient, is effective, and they want Ukraine to be a stable and resilient part of Europe, because this is about Ukraine, but it's also about the rest of Europe, of course. So they also express their solidarity with the country that way.
Oh, thank you so much. Believe me, we are so
you should thank them, actually, not...
Try to convey him, yes. Yeah. And finally, because time runs very quickly, and finally, we are now in the studio of public broadcaster. Finally, we managed to establish it, and now we face challenges, huge challenges, and we need a promotion to this kind of broadcasting. And may I ask you to promote a little, what does it mean, public broadcaster? How to explain it to ordinary people? Because they for sure need it, but they have to understand it.
This is, it's actually straightforward, but at the same time a fairly complicated question,
Yes,
I think.
know.
I would say for what you call ordinary people, for the citizens, public broadcasting is important because it has their interest at heart and not the interest of the owner of the broadcasting company, which would otherwise be commercial. So you try to, public broadcasting is supposed to spread information on issues which are relevant for the people, be transparent, be accountable to the people, etc., etc. And it's not just there in order to earn money for its owners through advertising campaigns. It's not supposed to manipulate the population. Public broadcasting is there for everybody, and therefore has to be open and transparent and also accessible, and take place not only in this studio but all over the country, in order to make it possible for people to learn about what's important for their local life that perhaps nobody else would actually tell them about.
And serve their interests.
So we are very, very keen on supporting the development of public broadcasting in Ukraine. We were involved in the law drafting that has recently been adopted, and we would very much like to be able to continue supporting now the implementation of these steps, first steps of the new, as from January, public broadcaster. We are working on this together with Ukrainian partners, and we are very actively looking for funds in order to make it possible.
Thank you so much for your support, for your hard work in supporting Ukraine. Many people knows you as a great friend of us. So thank you for being here in this studio.
It's been a great pleasure.
Welcome more and more in Ukraine, and discover it will help you with this. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. This was a great pleasure. Thank you.